Hey everyone, and welcome to Logik Talks. My name is Blake Grubbs. I'm the head of marketing at Logik.io, and I'll be hosting Logik Talks to bring you interviews with experts in the quote to cash space, in sales, and in the digital commerce space as well, to hopefully share some of their expertise with you. Really excited to share all of this with you. Hope you enjoy.
Awesome. Well, excited for this conversation today. We have Chris Haussler here from Logik on the product team, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about what truly makes Logik a next gen product configurator. I just joined here at Logik a few months ago, so I've talked with Chris a handful of times on and off here about what truly differentiates Logik, why we're so valuable in the market. So really excited to dive in deeper on that. So I'll pass it over to Chris now for a quick introduction, and then we'll get into it from there.
Sure. So thanks for the opportunity, Blake. I guess my official role is I'm a product manager for Logik, but in a company of our ilk, that basically means wearing a lot of different hats, which is a lot of fun. I've been about 14 to 15 years in the space, worked with big machines in an implementation and a product management role. Also inside of Oracle, ran the product management team for a while, and now get to basically start over and use all of that to hopefully solve the problem much better than we have previously. So this is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah. And like you just mentioned, right, you have all this experience working at big machines and Oracles and working with CPQ and configuration solutions a lot in the past. I think, where I really wanted to start off talking to you about was what were some of those challenges that you mentioned that you guys were seeing with those, traditional configuration solutions that you were working with? Like what really prompted Logik to be built the way that it is?
Well, it's interesting. And I don't want to get too far into a history lesson, but, I think one of the reasons that configuration has changed so much over the last 2 decades is not only our customers are more demanding, but manufacturers and vendors are having to basically match their markets much more closely than they ever had to before. So in the the 90s, the 80s, a configurator was essentially, how do I manufacture this good or this service? And if I presented that to a sales rep or a customer, it was good enough, right? Even just the increase in expectations about user experience over this time period has been absolutely amazing. In the early 90s, we were fine with Blackberries and V1 of internet, and then all of a sudden we get into e-commerce and we get into little computers in our pockets, and we expect that we're going to get that kind of experience from B2B software. We're going to get that kind of experience from every interaction we have with a customer or with a company when we try to engage them. So it's been a bit of, not only did we realize that the architecture of a configurator has to be completely different from the way it was a decade or two ago. It has to perform a lot better. It also has to be administrated much more flexibly and fluidly than anything that we've done in the past. So I think, if you look at the key pieces, it's user experience combined with greater expectations, greater flexibility in administration.
Got it. That's great. And that makes a ton of sense in terms of the way that just technology in general has progressed and the way that configurators need to keep up with that. So, more specifically, kind of you hit on a couple of things in terms of performance and the architectural decisions that you guys have made when kind of putting together the building blocks of Logik. Could you go a little bit more into detail about what those key innovations are that Logik has really helped bring to the market that truly, in our opinion, sets Logik apart?
Yeah. So I think there are a lot that are kind of under the radar, but the things that we do expose are, at the core, the foundation is our rules engine. This is a rules engine that is built for performance. It's built to make massive numbers of calculations in a very short period of time. And as a result, there are also follow-on decisions that are based in the administration architecture, whether it's the way that we actually have handled fields and rules from a global perspective and encouraging reusability there, down to basically giving the administrator an ability to not only do fine-tuned changes, but also do massive changes all at once. So our matrix loader allows an administrator to make changes to hundreds and thousands of rules, to layouts, all of that all at once, move them from site to site without any kind of hiccup, and make that really quick and fast. And that kind of also divides the work up for the rules engine into pieces that it can do very quickly and efficiently. So it's a combination of both, the items that we expose, the rules engine, the matrix loader. One thing I didn't even mention was hyperjump. On the administration side, you end up with a large body of rules and fields for a particular user experience. How do those relationships fit together? Now, if you are, in the old days, if you were an administrator coming into something you didn't build, it would take you a while. And sometimes you would never be successful trying to figure out how that thing was built. And so what ended up happening over time was a configurator would kind of be like it would grow different kinds of suboptimal growths that no one would understand, but because an administrator would not want to play with something that kind of worked, they would just live with it. And that ended up in poor performance. Now what we have is we've been able to break it down into the core components. And with something like hyperjump, an administrator can understand how it's put together really, really quickly from a bird's eye view, and also go in and out with the perspective that they need to make the changes they need whenever that happens.
Yeah, that's a great description of it. And speaking of breaking things down into their core components, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Logik is an attribute-based configurator, correct? So can you explain to me why that's important, why that matters to kind of the infrastructure and the architecture that you just mentioned, and the way that Logik is able to perform at such a high level?
Yeah, so I think if you go back to the more old school configurators that are based on EBS and back office solutions, where it was fine to essentially present a product in the way that it was going to be manufactured, that was fine for them. At some point, attribution was added, but it was still, the foundation was, how am I going to manufacture this product? Whereas the question that needs to be asked is, how do I need my customer to interact with this sales process? It's not about the product. It is, how do I actually ask the questions that help a sales rep come to the right solution, if there is one? If there are several different solutions, what questions do I need to ask to help them actually get to the perfect one for that customer's use case? That doesn't happen when you're already starting with the end in mind, which is the product that you manufacture. So when you're talking about attribute-based configurators, it is, let me take a different perspective from it, at it, and say, all right, what do I need to do to understand what the customer's bringing to me, and how a customer wants to think about this, and let me then kind of convert that into, I have something that can work for you. And I think that is the core difference between attribute-based configurators and constraint-based configurators.
Yeah, and I imagine that especially for companies that have highly complex products, right? Lots of different customizations and configurations that are even possible. I know if I were a sales rep for one of those companies, it would be difficult to even understand, not having the product expertise on every single product to be able to do that. So would you say that's a big piece of that value of the attribute-based config?
Yeah, definitely. And if you think about not only, what if that company wants to increase their sales team, they're going to bring in a whole bunch of reps that don't know the product. What if they want to actually change their product lineup in such a way? We find that, sales reps get good at selling something because they know they can make money on it. you change that out from underneath them, how are they going to actually realize, what they're going to sell next? And that is essentially, those are key things that guided selling and attribute-based configuration enable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, we just hit a little bit there on really what that value looks like for sales. And earlier you talked about that the ease of admin that Logik really brings to that. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how Logik's, next gen configurator really provides value to that admin team as well? You mentioned some of the things like matrix loader and hyper jump. What values do those teams see with Logik as they scale?
Well, I think if I look at the previous generation of configuration, this was after EBS. This was stuff like big machines. It was, allow me to have flexibility in my data structures and allow me to write a script that essentially gives me ultimate flexibility, but in the end, requires an IT person to actually maintain it and kind of gathers that detritus over time and eventually performs pretty poorly. In the Logik world, essentially by breaking it down into core components that we know are going to perform well, we basically not only ensure later performance, but we also put the administration task at the level that a product expert should be able to administrate. A product owner that understands how sales teams and customers address, come into talking about this need, what they need to see, rather than having, otherwise you actually have to have a very detailed conversation between product owner and IT, and hopefully that transmission works well and gets translated into a sales tool. More often than not, there's a hiccup that goes on in there, and we end up with what we've had over the last 10 to 15 years. So with Logik, basically breaking it down into the core components, we not only get the right people working in administration, but that actually makes it, time to value that much faster. And, whenever there are going to be changes, it's pretty easy to make.
Yeah, that's huge, right? Making that easy and making the time to value, shorter for these folks, obviously is a huge component of what we're trying to do here. Can you talk about, so you talked a little bit about the types of people within a business that are going to benefit from using something like Logik. Can you talk a little bit more about like what types of businesses is Logik right for? Like what types of businesses would you say is Logik a really good fit for?
Yeah, sure. So first I want to preface this. I love it when a customer comes to me and says, so you haven't thought about this, but could we use Logik this way? And all right, let's check that out. But and I, certainly, a lot of us at Logik come out of the big machines world where we took on the hairiest, most nasty, complex industrial manufacturing stuff ever, and Logik does that very well. But I will say that we are focused and running full tilt toward two specific use cases. One is the Salesforce customer that uses CPQ, but has found some limitations with it, doesn't present their products the way they want. It doesn't actually allow them to guide someone through the process as they want. They're just kind of hitting into some boundaries that they would like some flexibility around. And two is the e-commerce world. So in general, we look at e-commerce and, customers are getting much more demanding about, I want to serve myself. But most e-commerce platforms don't have the ability to have them make their own choices, guide them in the right directions. So that being the next step of e-commerce, Logik is positioning itself to handle that need.
Yeah. And that's interesting on the e-commerce side too. Would you say that, kind of based on some of those limitations that businesses have today, and or even just, technical hurdles that they have to, jump through to do that, would you say that they're prevented from even offering their products on e-commerce because of those hurdles today, and it's kind of been closed off from a potentially new revenue channel for them?
Yes, I think there are many companies out there that have said, you know what, this revenue stream is only going to be available through a direct sales or a partner sales force. if they actually had the ability to test out certain things in a self-service way, they would find that, oh, hey, this actually does work pretty well, and they would get pretty comfortable with it and start expanding that channel.
Yeah, super interesting. Awesome. Well, I think this gives a great overview of Logik and a good overview of kind of why we exist and kind of the value that we are bringing to the market. So thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can we'll have you jump back on at some point to do a deep dive on one of these things as well.
My pleasure. Glad to do it. Thanks, Blake.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.